Need to check the used names list and then write the story. The used names from the file are Margaret, Daniel, Renee, Gloria, Vivian, Lawrence, Brett, Courtney, Ruthann, Caleb, Priscilla, Harold, Adeline, Felicity, Nathan, Patricia, Evelyn, Connor, Shauna, Lily, Dorothy, Simone, Troy, Beatrice, Iris, Dennis, Wanda, June, Kevin, Melissa, Lukatso, Naomi, Trent, Suzanne, Audrey Mae Collins, Oliver, Marcus, Renata, Lorraine, Dwayne, Tamara, Cecile, Paulette, Garrett, Diane, Bernard, Joanne, Reginald, Felicia, Sandra, Eleanor, Chad, Arthur, Louise. Now I'll write the story with completely new names. I didn't pack a single box. I stood in the doorway of that house, the house I had paid for, the house I had cleaned, the house where I had sat up past midnight, praying for a boy who never once thanked me, and I didn't pack a single box. I just stood there, and then I turned around, walked to my car, and drove away. That was a Tuesday morning in March. By Friday, the deed was in someone else's name. I want to start from the beginning, because if I don't, none of this makes sense. And I need it to make sense. Not for you, for me. My name is Roberta. I'm 67 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a condo I bought myself with money I earned myself, and I sleep through the night now. I couldn't always say that. For 31 years, I worked as a billing coordinator at a regional hospital system. Not glamorous, not the kind of job you brag about at dinner parties, but it was steady, it was honest, and I was good at it. I raised my son, Theo, mostly alone after his father and I divorced when Theo was 9. I packed his lunches. I went to every single one of his baseball games, even the ones where he struck out 3 times and acted like it was my fault. I paid for his college, not all of it, but enough that he graduated without drowning in debt. I was proud of that. I was proud of him. I don't say any of this to make myself sound like a saint. I made mistakes. I gave him too much when he was young. I said yes when I should have said no. I thought that was love. I understand now that I was love. I understand now that I was teaching him something else entirely. Theo married Whitney 4 years ago. I remember the first time he brought her home. Thanksgiving, 2 years before the wedding. She came in wearing a coat that cost more than my car payment, sat down at my table, and spent the entire meal on her phone. When I asked her what she did for work, she looked up at me and said, "I'm between opportunities right now." And then she went back to scrolling. I smiled. I passed the sweet potatoes. I told myself she was nervous. She wasn't nervous. That was just who she was. After the wedding, things shifted in ways that were hard to name at first. Theo stopped calling as much. When he did call, the conversations were short, like he was checking off a task. He stopped coming to Sunday dinners. He forgot my birthday one year. Not a card, not a text, nothing. And when I mentioned it, he said, "Mom, we've been really busy." Whitney had gotten a job at a marketing firm by then, and apparently being busy meant I no longer existed Monday through Sunday. I told myself it was normal. Newlyweds, building their life. Then came the house. Theo called me on a Wednesday evening in the fall. He and Whitney had found a place they loved, a 4-bedroom colonial in a suburb called Winding Creek, about 20 minutes from me. Good school district, nice yard. The problem, he said, was the down payment. They were a little short. Could I help? I asked how much. He said $60,000. I was quiet for a moment. I heard Whitney's voice in the background, low and coaching, like she was feeding him lines. I told him I'd think about it. I did think about it. For 2 weeks I thought about it. I looked at my savings, my retirement accounts, what I had set aside for emergencies. I was 63 at the time. $60,000 was not nothing. It was years of careful living, brown bag lunches, skipping vacations, driving the same car for 11 years. But he was my son, and I genuinely believed that this would be the beginning of something better between us. That he would see I was in his corner, that Whitney would soften toward me once she understood what I had done for them. I wired the money. I didn't ask for anything in writing. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was believing things would change. They didn't move into that house and suddenly become grateful people. They moved in, and it was like the transaction was already forgotten. I drove out to see the place the first weekend they were there. I brought a housewarming gift, a cheese board set I'd spent real time picking out, good quality, the kind of thing you keep for years. Whitney looked at it and said, "Oh, we actually don't really do cheese boards," and set it on the kitchen counter without unwrapping it. Theo laughed. I drove home that night with my jaw clenched so tight my teeth hurt. Over the next 2 years, I was invited to that house exactly 4 times. Twice for holiday gatherings where Whitney made it clear through every small gesture, the seating arrangement, the way she talked over me, the way she called me Theo's mom instead of my name, that I was a guest who had overstayed her welcome before she even arrived. Once for a birthday party for Whitney's niece, where I sat in the corner and knew maybe 2 people, and once because the kitchen faucet broke and Theo needed someone to let the plumber in while they were both at work. That last visit, I noticed some things. The cheese board set I'd given them was gone. A bottle of wine I'd brought at Christmas was being used as a decorative prop on a shelf. The cork still in, the label turned outward. My photo, the one Theo had kept on his desk since college, the one of the 2 of us at his graduation. It wasn't anywhere in that house. Not on a wall, not on a shelf, nowhere. I looked for it. I'm not ashamed to say I looked. It wasn't there. The slap didn't come out of nowhere. That's what people don't understand. It was the end of a very long road, and I could see that road clearly now, even if I couldn't see it then. It was a Saturday afternoon in January. I had driven out to Winding Creek because Theo had called. Whitney was out of town at a conference, he said, and he needed to talk to me. His voice sounded off, strained in a way I hadn't heard before. I got there around 2 in the afternoon. The house was a mess, which surprised me. Theo had always been tidy, almost obsessively so as a teenager. There were dishes in the sink, mail piled everywhere, a half-empty bottle of bourbon on the coffee table at 2 in the afternoon. He told me he'd gotten into some trouble. I sat down. I kept my voice even. I asked him what kind of trouble. He had been gambling. Not casually, seriously, for about 18 months. Online sports betting at first, then poker apps, then actual trips to a casino 2 hours away. He owed money. He wouldn't tell me how much at first, just that it was significant, and that it was bad, and that he needed help before Whitney found out. I asked him again, "How much?" He said $43,000. I sat with that number for a long moment. $43,000, on top of the 60 I had already given them. On top of the years of smaller things, the graduation trip I'd paid for, the car repairs, the months when his rent was due and he'd called me with that particular tone of voice. I told him I didn't have that kind of money to give. Not anymore. I told him I was 67 years old and I had to protect what I had left. He got quiet. And then he got mean. He said I had always chosen myself. He said I had never actually been there for him, not really, not in the ways that mattered. He said that if I had been a better mother, he wouldn't be in this situation. He said, and I remember every word of this, he said, "You know what your problem is. You think $60,000 makes you a good mother. It doesn't. You were never enough." I stood up. I told him I was leaving. He grabbed my arm. I told him to let go. And then he hit me, open hand, across my left cheek, hard enough that I stumbled back against the wall. I know there are people reading this who will ask why I didn't leave after the first one, and I hear that question, and I understand it, and the honest answer is that my brain went somewhere else entirely for a few seconds. I wasn't in that living room anymore. I was standing in a kitchen in 1994, looking at a 9-year-old boy, crying because his father had just driven away with 2 suitcases, and I was telling him it was going to be okay. I was back in that moment, trying to hold us both together. He hit me again. And then again. By the time I came back to myself fully, I was sliding down the wall onto the floor, and he was standing over me, breathing hard, and he looked, I will never forget this, he looked almost surprised, like he hadn't meant for that to happen, like he'd startled himself. I don't know how many times. I stopped counting. What I know is that at some point he stopped, and he walked into the kitchen, and I heard him pour a drink. I sat on that floor for what felt like a very long time. My cheek was throbbing, my shoulder hurt where I'd hit the wall, and I felt something settling over me, not rage, not grief, something quieter than both, something final. I got up. I didn't say anything. I picked up my purse from where it had fallen. I walked to the front door. He called after me from the kitchen. He said, "Mom, come on, don't be dramatic." I closed the door behind me. I sat in my car at the end of his driveway for about 10 minutes. I didn't cry. I made a phone call. Her name is Anita, and she has been my attorney for 12 years. She handled my divorce. She helped me set up my will. She is one of those women who speaks in complete, precise sentences and never wastes a single word. And when I told her what had just happened, she was quiet for exactly 3 seconds, and then she said, "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." I did. When I finished, she asked me one question: whose name is on the deed to that house? I told her mine. When I had wired the $60,000 for the down payment, the mortgage had been structured in a way that put my name as a co-owner on the property. Theo had needed my credit score to qualify. I had signed documents I hadn't fully understood at the time. Anita told me to come into her office Monday morning and bring every piece of paperwork I had. I went home. I put ice on my face. I sat in my kitchen in the dark for a long time. Sunday, I drove to the urgent care clinic and had my injuries documented. The nurse who saw me, a young woman, couldn't have been 30, looked at my face and asked me, very gently, if I was safe. I told her I was now. She squeezed my hand before I left. That documentation would matter later. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew it would. Monday morning I was at Anita's office at 8:30 with a folder full of papers. She went through everything quietly, making notes. Then she looked up and said, "Roberta, because your name is on this deed as a co-owner, you have legal standing to sell your interest in this property. With the right approach, we may be able to force a sale." I told her to do it. She walked me through what that meant and how long it might take. She explained the legal process, a partition action if necessary, though she believed once Theo received formal notice, he would have limited options. She told me there were no guarantees, but she told me she had handled cases like this before. I told her I understood. I told her to move forward. She filed the paperwork that week. I want to be clear about something. I didn't do this to hurt my son. I did it because I finally understood that I had spent 30 years hurting myself trying to save him, and I had nothing left to show for it except a bruised face and a bank account that should have been larger than it was. I did it because I looked at that house I had helped buy with money I had carefully saved over years of early mornings and late nights, and I could not let it stand as a monument to what he had done to me. He called me Tuesday. The Wednesday, then Wednesday, then for the Friday. I didn't answer. I had nothing to say that my attorney wasn't already saying through the proper channels. Whitney got back from her conference that Thursday. I don't know what Theo told her. What I know is that she called me from her own phone Friday morning, and her voice was entirely different from every conversation we had ever had. No coolness, no performative detachment. She was scared. She asked me what I was doing. I told her I was protecting myself. She said this wasn't fair to her, that she hadn't done anything wrong, that the house was her home too. I told her that was true, and I was sorry that she was caught in the middle of something her husband had created. I meant that. I wasn't doing this to destroy Whitney, whatever I thought of her, but I also told her that I could not and would not simply absorb what Theo had done to me and go on as if nothing had happened. She cried. I let her cry. And then I told her that if she wanted to talk about next steps, she should have Theo contact Anita. I hung up. The next few weeks were not easy. There were times I sat in my condo at night and wondered if I was doing the right thing, not because what Theo had done wasn't real, but because I was his mother, and there is a particular kind of grief that comes with accepting that the child you raised is capable of something like this. You don't grieve the action alone. You grieve every moment before it, every time you should have seen what was coming and chose to look away. My sister Pauline drove up from Colombia to stay with me for a week. She is 3 years older than me and has never been afraid to say hard things out loud. She sat across from me at my kitchen table and said, "You did everything right for 30 years and it still came to this, and that is not your fault, and you need to stop trying to make it your fault." I told her I wasn't trying to. She gave me a look that told me she knew I was lying. She was right. I was. It's hard not to. When something goes this wrong with your child, the instinct is to go back and find the moment where you could have fixed it, where you could have turned the wheel differently. But there isn't always a moment like that. Sometimes people just become who they become, and all you can do is decide what you do next. My friend Claudette from church came over twice. She prayed with me, which helped more than I expected it to. My neighbour, an older gentleman named Ray, noticed I had a bruise still fading on my cheek, and he said, "I don't know what happened, and it's none of my business, but if you need anything, you knock on that wall." He pointed at the shared wall between our units. "I'll hear it." I nearly cried. I held it together. People show up in the strangest ways when things fall apart. Theo was served with the legal papers on a Thursday afternoon. I know this because Anita called me and told me, and because 45 minutes later my phone lit up with his name, and I watched it ring and go to voicemail. He left a message. I listened to it once. He was not screaming. That almost made it harder. He sounded genuinely devastated, genuinely confused, like a man who could not understand what was happening to him or why. He said I was taking his home. He said he was going to lose everything. He said he was going to lose everything. He said he needed me. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. Then I deleted the message and called Anita back. The process took about 3 months in total. Theo attempted to contest certain aspects of it. His attorney and Anita went back and forth. In the end, the property was sold. The proceeds were split according to my ownership stake and the documented investment I had made in the down payment. After everything was settled, I received a sum that restored a significant portion of what I had lost. I won't tell you I felt triumphant. I felt tired. I felt something like relief and something like sorrow at the same time, and I couldn't fully separate the two. There were consequences beyond the financial. Theo's gambling debt came out in the legal process. It was unavoidable. Whitney found out everything. I don't know what happened between them after that. I heard through a cousin that they separated, then reconciled, then separated again. I don't track it. I stopped tracking anything about his life the day I walked out of that house. What I do know is that I filed a police report about what he did to me physically. I should have done it the same day, and I didn't, but the documentation from the urgent care clinic helped establish the timeline. There were no criminal charges ultimately filed. The district attorney's office has wide discretion in these things, and cases involving family members are complicated, but the report is on record. It exists, and Theo knows it exists. I don't know if he got help. I hope he did. I mean that with whatever complicated, bruised, still partially intact love I have for him, I genuinely hope he found his way to some kind of help. Not for my sake, for his. Because no one wakes up one morning and decides to be the kind of person who hits his mother. Something hollowed him out along the way, and I have had to spend a lot of time in prayer making peace with the part I might have played in that, without ever intending to, but I cannot carry that forever. I have to put it down. I'm telling you this because I know there are women sitting with something similar right now. Maybe not identical. Maybe it's a different relationship, a different kind of harm, a different set of papers on a different table. But they know the feeling, that particular exhaustion of loving someone who costs you more than you have. I want to say something clearly. Leaving is not giving up. Protecting yourself is not betrayal. The money I sent to Theo over the years, I gave it willingly, and I don't regret giving it, because I gave it when I still believed it meant something to him. The day it stopped meaning anything to him, I had to stop giving. That is not cruelty. That is self-preservation. I sleep through the night now, like I said. My condo is quiet in a way that took some getting used to, quiet in a way that used to feel like loneliness, and now just feels like peace. I have my sister, I have Claudette, I have Ray next door who told me to knock on the wall. I have myself, which is the thing I almost forgot to hold on to. I closed my journal last night and turned off the bedside lamp and lay in the dark for a while, the way I do now. And I thought about that 9-year-old boy in the kitchen, the one I promised everything was going to be okay. I thought about how hard I tried to keep that promise. I thought about how long I kept trying after the point where trying had become the problem. And then I let him go. Not forever. Not with hatred. But I let go of the version of him I had been carrying, the one who still needed me, the one I could still save. Because he is 67 years old now in my heart, same as me, and he has to save himself. That's the only way this ends right. I used to think that love was supposed to be unconditional. I said that word for years, unconditional. Like it was the highest form of devotion a mother could offer. But somewhere along the way, I confused unconditional love with unconditional tolerance. And those are not the same thing. they were never the same thing. What happened with my son didn't come out of nowhere. That's the part I had to sit with the longest. The $60,000 I gave him wasn't just money. It was a message I didn't mean to send. It told him that no matter what he did, no matter how little he gave back, I would keep showing up with something in my hands. Every time I said yes when I should have said no, I was teaching him that there were no real consequences. That love, my love specifically, had no flaw. He found the flaw eventually. We both did. There's a principle I've come to believe in deeply, not because anyone told me to, but because I've lived it. What you allow continues, not out of spite, not out of spite, not out of cosmic punishment, but simply because that's how human behavior works. We do what works. Theo kept taking because taking worked. The moment it stopped working, the moment I walked out of our house and called Anita and said, "Move forward," everything changed. Not because I had finally punished him, but because I had finally stopped rewarding the wrong things. That is what accountability actually looks like. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It's a phone call you make from a parking lot with a bruise forming on your face. It's paperwork. It's sitting in an attorney's office with a folder and saying, "I am done absorbing this." The tricky thing about resilience is that most people think it means enduring, staying, holding on. But sometimes resilience is the decision to stop enduring something that was never yours to carry in the first place. My son's choices were his gambling, his rage, the way he looked at me on that floor. None of that was my fault to fix. I spent 30 years believing otherwise, and that belief cost me more than any amount of money ever did. What I know now, at 67, sitting in a quiet condo with no one to explain myself to, is this: you can love someone and still protect yourself from them. You can grieve a relationship and still make the hard decision. You can be a good mother and still say enough. These things are not contradictions. They are the full truth of what it means to be human. Whitney called me scared. Theo called me crying. And I felt something for both of them. I did. But feeling something is not the same as going back. Intelligence, real intelligence, is knowing the difference between a moment of emotion and a pattern of behavior. Theo's pattern had a 30-year history. One voicemail doesn't erase that. I want anyone sitting with something similar right now to hear me clearly. Your kindness is not the problem. Your love is not the problem. The problem is what happens when you extend both of those things to someone who has learned to use them against you. That is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of their choices. Put the folder on the table. Make the call. Walk to your car. You don't have to stop loving someone to stop letting them hurt you.